Hi there, and apologies to everybody for the slight delay. Yes, had a few issues with the internet. Affected the videos I did over the weekend. Hope it wasn't too obvious, but on a couple of occasions I had to shorten them because I just had to limit the amount of time I was going to be spending uploading, blah, 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 you know, the usual stuff. So anyway, I hope you can hear me loud and clear. I'm not sure you all want to see me anyway, but anyway, here we are. The Monday after the Dutch Grand Prix, and what a race it was. Max Verstappen, again, just masterful, wasn't he? He was just superb. I think it's very easy to, I said this in the video yesterday, it's very easy to underestimate the job Max is doing because he's winning at the slowest possible speed with the most conservative approach that you can do within the realms of being an aggressive, very fast racing driver. And I think it's I don't know. I mean, to me, I don't want to bang on about it, but you only got to look at how difficult Sergio Perez makes life look fairly regularly to see how good a job Max Verstappen is doing. It's not a car that will just blitz everything. You put a very good racing driver who's quite capable of winning Grand Prix, obviously, Sergio. But, it's not easy. And if Max had, I don't know, whatever, blown an engine or whatever yesterday, that race would have been won by Fernando Alonso. He would have beaten Sergio Perez. And that just, we need to remember that, I think, when we all get a bit bored, if you do get bored with Max winning. I personally don't, because I've always enjoyed watching perfection, really. And when you've got an extremely good racing driver who's right up there in terms of great racing drivers of all time, with the other greats, in what is absolutely for sure the best car in Formula One, and he's getting the best from that car, and the team are getting the best from the driver, and the driver and the engineer are so much in sync as obviously Max is with Adrian and his engineers, then it's just a pleasure to watch, regardless really of how many laps he wins by or whatever he does. But I mean, Zandvoort was always going to be a tense race because of the variables, because of the length of the circuit, because so many things can happen there and do happen there, and safety cars and the weather and the wind and the sand and everything else. And he wouldn't have been that confident, I don't think, going into that race. Just confident in himself, confident in what he could do with the car, and making a clear start would have been the key, getting through that first corner, which he did very well. But a lot of pressure from Fernando Alonso, which, and I'll get on to everybody's questions, but I always like to have a little bit of dominate the airwaves, as it were, myself initially, because I've obviously with the debrief, there's a little bit of time to let it all digest, as distinct from just reacting to what we've just seen. And there's a couple of things that I thought were quite interesting coming from, well, first of all, Toto Wolff saying, and all credit, Merck had him out there doing something straight after the race. You could even hear the podium music going on in the background, talking about the diabolical strategy of Mercedes in terms of not bringing the drivers in quickly enough for intermediates. I'll get onto that point in a minute, actually, because I think he's actually being a little bit harsh on himself and the team there, because there's something else they could have done, which maybe they haven't really realised. But anyway, putting that to one side, he actually says, and I'll put it up now, he actually says, we were quicker than the two other contenders. And he's talking about late in the race. It was absolutely, heartbreaking that we couldn't get onto the podium. I don't think he means Max there when he talks about the two other podium contenders. I think he means Fernando and Pierre Gasly, so contenders. There you go. So he's saying that he was quicker than Fernando, or Lewis was, obviously, particularly at the end of the race, really quick. And I take issue with that, because for a start, Lewis couldn't get past Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, and the Ferrari was not a very good car around Zandvoort. And he tried, obviously, and he could have gone quicker had Carlos Sainz not been there on the road in front of him, but he couldn't get past him. This was in the last phase of the race on intermediates, and for that, I think, and we'll put up another. And this is entirely due to the top speed of the Ferrari, which I was talking about on Friday and Saturday. Look at that, 331. Lewis Hamilton 324. That's why he couldn't get past the Ferrari. So that's the first thing I'd say, for Toto to say we had a much quicker car. Obviously, over the lap, it was a much quicker car than the Ferrari. But in terms of actually getting a result and being a a car that could take Lewis to the podium. It had its shortcomings for sure. And here's the next point, which I think is, this is the real crux of what I'm getting to say about that quote. Sorry, I'll put it here. Is if you look at the phase of the race when it's dry, they're on soft tyres and they're coming up for their second set of soft tyres. And just before that, obviously they've got their fuel and everything sorted out. They know that they're coming in, so they're going hard on the slicks. And Max also set his fastest lap at this stage. And this is where Fernando set fastest lap of the race, 13.837. You can see it there in red. So look at that period, 50. It's a 10-lap period before they came in for those new tyres. And none of them got the best from the new tyres after that, because then there was talk about the rain coming and it was starting to spit with rain anyway. So this was the critical moment when you could decide, when we could look at the cars and say, okay, how did they compare one-on-one around Zandvoort? And if you look at Fernando's lap times there, starting from lap 50 down to lap 60, he's got, 3 laps in the 13s, ending in a 13.8, and he's got 3 laps at 14.1. And let's look at Lewis over the same period when he also set his fastest lap. And it's that fastest lap, I think, that has given Toto quite a lot of encouragement. Obviously, 13.9 compared with Fernando's 13.8, we were right there sort of thing. But look at the consistency, or lack of consistency, if you like, compared with Fernando in the pace. So you got, when Fernando's doing 14.1, Lewis 14.8, bear in mind there's traffic involved here and lapping slower cars as well. But there's 14.1 there, and there's 2 laps under 14. So on that basis, I would not say that the Mercedes was a quicker car than the Aston Martin around Zandvoort, which is what Toto Wolff is saying. And if he's saying, oh, well, I meant at the end of the race, well, if at the end of the race, he couldn't get past the Ferrari, so, and because of its lack of top speed. So, please advise Toto, I think. The other thing, just coming back to me now, the other thing I was going to say, Mercedes are all, going on about the strategy. They didn't come in on the first lap like Gasly, like Guan Yu Zhou and several others. But guess who didn't come in on the first lap? Didn't come in the second, third, fourth or fifth lap? Alex Albon in the Williams. And I don't understand why Mercedes, having taken the plunge, if you like, to keep their 2 guys out there, and then they suddenly shocked to see Max and Fernando coming in. Why didn't they then at that point say, okay, we've made the decision, we'll live with it. We've got 2 guys who are unbelievably good at driving on slicks in the wet. Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, 2 of the best guys in the world for that. We know the rain is going to go away. We'll live with it. Why didn't they do that? Williams did that. James Voles did that, ex-Mercedes guy. And if had they done that, lot more chance that Lewis would have been on the podium because he lost so much time, obviously with the pit stops, and then having to go in again. And when, if you look at what Alex Albon was doing sort of lap, Lewis came in on the 3rd lap, George on the 4th. So if you look at Lewis's 5th lap compared with Alex Albon's, he was like 10 seconds a lap slower at that point. So it wasn't just, let's just get that absolutely right, because I'm doing that from memory. But Lewis, lap 5, 26.0, and let's just have a look at Alex Albon lap 5. No, better one. Actually, it's not a very good example because he's obviously had a moment there. Let's look at lap 8. There you go, lap 8. Alexander Albon 22.3, Lewis Hamilton 24.2. So by then, the slick is a much quicker tyre. So I don't know why they're all saying, oh, we should have come in. That's because that's what obviously Max and Fernando did. But Max would say, well, I came in a lap late. If you're going to come in, you should have come in on the first lap. And Fernando would say the same thing. And I think if you didn't come in on the first lap, stay out would have been the thing, especially if you got 2 guys like that. If you haven't got those 2 drivers, then maybe, you make a different choice. But for me, that's what they should be saying, is why didn't we trust ourselves and back ourselves, as Steve Waugh used to say. The great Australian cricket captain, why didn't we back ourselves and just stay out there and live with it? Because then this very fast car, faster than the Aston Martin and the Alpine that Toto's talking about, might well have taken Lewis to the podium, and maybe even George. I mean, George, they brought George in for slicks, and then they put him onto the hard tyre, didn't they, with the safety car thing. So that was a complete mess. But that was another story, really. So that was what I wanted to say about that. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about Liam Lawson, because I thought he went really well. I mean, he was on mediums once the race really got underway. And on mediums, he was within a tenth or two of guys like Bottas and Stroll, who were on mediums. And then late in the race on the intermediates, he was really good as well. And obviously, didn't have a great result. And I don't know what other people are saying about him, but to me, Liam Lawson had a very, very good first Grand Prix. Whether or not, of course, we see him again in the car depends very much on the fitness of Daniel Ricciardo. But Liam Lawson, fastest lap in the race was 14.8. Carlos Sainz, 14.9. So that gives you an idea of how well he drove. And you look at guys like Bottas, 14.6. He was quicker than Zhou, quicker than Magnussen. I thought he did very well, jumping in as he did on a Saturday, which is not very easy. If you don't have a Friday in which to extend yourself and make a few mistakes, it's very difficult for a rookie, given the limited time, especially if there's the first run he had was in the wet. So to me, I mean, I go on about it a bit because I'm very excited about Liam Lawson. I think this guy has a massive amount of talent. Don't know whether he's a short corner driver yet or not, but that's another matter. I haven't seen enough of him. But what I have seen is his car control, and he's really, really good on car control. Really good. So just taking one nicely yellow-coloured question that's come in straight away. Hi, Peter. I'll put this up. I'm going to go back to my old thing of trying to make this work. It's not the easiest thing in the world, this, but I think it works. Here we go. I always have to try and shorten the sentences. And I've tried before, and I've mentioned that if I had a PC accessing from a Mac, I think the software would work for this, but I don't. And there you go. Blame Apple for this one. So there we go. It kind of looks all right. And I'll just fix that up, move it a little bit to the right. Yeah, get below that. So this is a nice question. Thank you very much indeed for that. Hi, Peter. Max commented post-race that he was playing around with setup and found something in the car at Baku, which he put to use in future races. What do you think he was maybe referring to? Very good question. I would guess, and this is from Take the Blue Pill 16. I would guess that I would guess it's something to do with the diff, and it's to do with the way he can get the car into the corner with load, even more load than he has with his early turn in and short corner. It'd be something to help him even more get the car to the point where he can just do the rotation and then get it pointed diagonally for the exit. I would guess it would be something in that area. I can't imagine it would be anything more fundamental than that, tire pressures or ride height or anything, because that would bleed over to Perez's side of the garage. It would be something that probably, if he knew about it, Sergio might try it and then find that it doesn't make any difference or makes the car worse. It would only work in the way, it'd be something to do with the way Max drives. And the thing that springs to mind would be something like the diff. So, I mean, obviously, I don't know, and nobody at Red Bull will ever tell you. I have a sort of annual conversation with Jonathan Wheatley in which he says, oh, yeah, hi, how are you? We have lots of conversation. He says, don't ask me any questions. And I never ask him any questions. And I ask him lots of questions and he never answers. And I kind of take what I can out of that. But, yeah, I think it's going to be something like that, something subtle like that. And it's probably something that, he would have been playing around with, but it would have been something he would have run around his engineers and and it would have been, something that would help him drive the car. Now, I can't quite sure why I can't get rid of this. It's been pinned, that's why, which is okay. So here we go. There's another one. Joe Spiker V8 V11. This is now me going through everything in chronological order. But if you want to jump the queue, I think you can do that in some sort of way, which you guys know more about than I do, really. I would never suggest anything to do with pounds, shillings and pence. That's not my style, as you know. Amazing to think Monza, I'm just rambling on as I talk, but amazing to think Monza's just a few days away, isn't it? Looking forward to that one very much. Hi, Peter. Oh, that doesn't work. Sorry. What happened there? What happened there? Okay, I don't know why that didn't work. Sorry. Okay. No, what I didn't do was copy the other one. I'll tell you what's going on. I'm slightly discombobulated by the whole business with the internet, and I'm still hoping that everything's working now, because you're sort of flying blind, and so that's slightly taken away my focus on the more logical things that I should be doing. Here we go. This is better. Let's have a look. This is from Joe Spiker, as I say. I'm just trying to get it all looking nice. We'll be right with you. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll sort of ramble and free talk when I'm doing all this, just to sort of keep it all going. Right, Toto said something about it. Lewis did, Frederick as well. Why are other teams trying to hint at this? I don't like the insinuation. I think Max just makes a difference. Are they just throwing mud? Well, I'm kind of out of context of what you're talking to about that. Are they saying... they're saying that Max isn't that good? Because Max Stapleton in the next question says, I think they are. I mean, you only have to compare Max's career to Checo's. Historically, in changing conditions, Max has been much more skilled compared to Checo, not to mention Max has beaten every teammate. That's Max Stapleton replying to that. Okay. Yeah, I think there's a question later on, which I'll definitely put up, but it's about why wasn't Checo at least as quick, if not quicker than Max at Zandvoort in the semi-wet or wet, because Max was taking long corners. Well, as I've said before, in the wet, it's not all bets are off. It's that you've got to look for where the grip is. That's more important than anything else. You've got to be where the grip is. And usually that's kind of on the racing line, but quite often on slow corners, it's on the outside of the corner, because there's less grunge there, if that's the right word. But the difference between Max and Checo in the wet, in my opinion, is one of the things that nonetheless still makes Max the driver he is in the dry, and that is his rates of input, by which I mean he's responding almost to perfection to everything the car needs at any given moment. He's balancing that table with the balls. He's doing it at exactly the right rate. Every movement is at the right rate. And that means that obviously there's a certain amount of suppleness and softness in everything he's doing. And that definitely helps him in the wet as well. Even though it may not look as if he's got shorter corners in the wet, what you're seeing is a sublime touch. Lewis has it as well. Charles used to have it when he was driving a decent car. I don't know, he's kind of given up now, hasn't he? Right, next question. See if I can get this one right now. This is that was a little bit of a misfire, wasn't it, that question, because I didn't really see what the context was. My fault, of course, but too busy working on other stuff. Where am I doing here? Text. Here we go. So here we go with the next one. This is about Valtteri, who's become a bit of a sort of hippie, isn't he, with the long hair and all that stuff and the mo. I like Valtteri, good bloke, and he was very quick in the early days, and he's still pretty quick now, but he does seem to have a difficulty stitching the whole weekend together. We see him quick on a Friday and then it falls away in qualifying, or he has a decent qualifying that falls away in the race, a little bit like that yesterday. So here we go, RMDS KDVL. Hi Peter, is Valtteri slacking off as an F1 driver and Gunther Steiner as a team boss? There seems to be no intensity or intent to get better from either of them. Well, of course, I mean, Valtteri doesn't drive for Haas, so two different questions there. But is Valtteri slacking off as an F1 driver? I suspect he has a little bit. We've seen him on occasions this year looking pretty sharp and going well. Not massively quicker than Zhou Guanyu, but looking good. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of loss of edge with Valtteri, which comes with the life he's living now, A, and B, I think looking ahead into the future, he can see the Audi takeover, if you like, and the rebranding and the whole new technology probably isn't going to include Valtteri Bottas. It might in some sort of managerial or advisory role, I don't know, but probably not thinking of himself as a driver. And then he's probably thinking, well, that's my moment, and I'll he's not thinking I'll back away at all, but I think when those thoughts start to come into your head, For example, I can't imagine Oscar Piastri or, Liam Lawson are thinking, oh, when am I going to retire? All they're thinking about is tomorrow. And I think in Valtteri's case, possibly there is a little bit of that. But give him a good racing car, good set of tyres, free lap. He'll be quick as anybody, most people anyway. He's still there. As for Gunther Steiner, don't know. I mean, he's team principal of Haas, and I don't know how much he gets involved with the driver choice and how they run the team. He didn't, I mean, bearing in mind both those old guys, Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, I mean, you sign those two, re-sign those two, because you think, right, well, we're not going to take any more risks with these young guys. We've got some reasonable results out of them. Let's just stick with it, because these two are always going to bring the car home. They're not going to do silly things. And then what happened? The first race after they've re-signed for 2024, they both have shunts, and you'd be thinking, wow, maybe we'd be better off with Mick Schumacher and, I don't know, Nick De Vries or something. So, it's a funny old world, isn't it? And to me, it's a little bit of a boring driver choice. I must say, I like Nico Hülkenberg. I think he's a great guy. Kevin Magnussen, we saw that moment in the race, didn't he, with Alex Albon, when Alex sort of got on the radio with dismay. Whoa, what was that? And it was Kevin Magnussen coming across at the last minute. And Kevin was eyeing up somebody in front, and Albon was catching Kevin quite quickly from the DRS. I was a bit surprised by that, actually, because the implication from it all was that Alex Albon was caught by surprise by Kevin Magnussen's sudden move to the right. But Kevin Magnussen's been doing that throughout his Formula One career, so why would Alex be surprised by that? Maybe he's never raced with him before, I don't know. Very odd that he'd be surprised. Having said that, maybe he was just putting all that on just to make sure the stewards saw what was happening. But, with Kevin Magnussen, there's always going to be one of those. He's a pretty tough, hard driver to have alongside you if you're actually racing with him. Very tough guy. So they've got that. They got Nico and Haas. Yeah, I mean, two solid guys. What can you say? It's a shame, isn't it? I mean, it'd be wonderful to see a young American in there. It's an American team. We've seen now how well Logan Sargent's going at Williams. I think he's doing a really good job. And, there's room for more Americans, that's for sure. Colton Herta, the guy that springs to mind. And there are plenty of others. It's, I don't know, is Gunther Steiner slacking off? He's a very energized guy. I mean, I've known Gunther for quite a long time, and he's got his carbon shop and Charlotte, North Carolina, flying up and down, and he's always got something going on, and I can't imagine him ever slack off. He's a bit like Franz Tost. I mean, he may be leaving AlphaTauri, but Franz's idea of hell is to have to spend Christmas Day not answering the phone. He like Frank Williams, they all have this sort of racer thing where they just got to be doing something all the time. Next race, next phone call, next Zoom meeting, got to get on with it, don't stop. And all of a sudden it's all over. Anyway, I don't know, that's it. I don't, what can I say? That's all I can say, really. So here we go. Glenroy Heath. Have a look and see what's going on here with Glenroy Heath. Sorry about always having to put all these things in, but it is the only way that I can get it on screen. I've looked at every possible opportunity, and nothing ever seems to work, apart from this, and this kind of works. So Glenroy Heath says, "Hey Peter, do you agree that the 2021 Red Bull and the W12 were on equal terms performance-wise, Red Bull being better in the beginning, Mercedes better at the end?" Yeah, they were very closely matched, very, very closely matched. I think from memory, Mercedes was usually a bit quicker in a straight line from memory, but it was close. It was very close, and yeah, you're right. I think we saw Mercedes definitely with a very competitive car in the last few races, and I still say that race of Lewis's at Abu Dhabi was one of the best races he ever drove, and considering the state of the championship, it was a really impressive performance from Mercedes as well, I think, to do as well as they did. And I was just thinking, actually, to go on about it again, I was just thinking when the whole red flag thing came out at Zandvoort, and they all stopped, and then they told everybody what tyres to be on. Well, why didn't they do that at Abu Dhabi? If they're going to stop the race, why didn't they do that? Everybody must be on a new set of soft tyres, one lap sprint to the finish. That would have been okay. But to, allow pit stops and then have the race start when it shouldn't have, still sticks in the gullet, that one. Nothing to do with Max deserving it or not. I just think it was an insanely bad decision at the wrong time. Okay, Aaron Lee. This looks like quite a good, difficult question from Aaron Lee, putting my little grey cells to work at this stage of the weekend. Is it the weekend still? No, it's Monday, isn't it? I must say, doing 3 videos in 3 days, I actually feel reasonably mentally exhausted by the time the race one comes along. But bear that in mind next time everybody's criticising. Have I got everything in here? Aaron Lee. Hi Peter, who instructs the pit crew to hold their air gun hoses up when the adjacent team is doing a pit stop? There is no inter-team communication of this, right? No, it'll be the guy. Well, there will be a guy on the pit apron on the radio to the boys and girls, looking up all the time, and he'll be saying, you know, raise guns, clear area, whatever, based on a car coming out. So yeah, that's I would imagine that's what's going on. I can't imagine it wouldn't be anything other than that. No, there is no intercommunication between the teams as far as I know. I don't think so. It would just be a team member, probably the guy who does the lollipop anyway, who's always out there looking and keeping everybody out of the way if something happens. Speaking of guns, I don't know if anybody watched the F2 race, but Prema, of all teams, you know, like Williams of all teams having a pit stop drama back in my day. Yeah, okay, we'll put that to one side. But Prema of all teams bring in Frederick Vesti for his mandatory tyre stop, and he started to go through the field looking for get a reasonable result after a very silly spin at the first corner, and he goes out of the pits, and then both rear wheels come off the car. I've never seen that halfway around the lap. Both rear wheels. It was a stacked pit stop. I can only assume that there was some problem with the air supply because it was a stacked stop and it just affected the 2 rears on the car. Never seen that. Pretty shocking, really. See both rear wheels coming off. Imagine what that's like for the driver. Terrible. Yeah, so that's that one. Good question. Thank you, Aaron. Another one from Aaron. Here's Aaron Lee, on the ball as ever, filling in all the data that we need. Thank you. Let's get this one going. I think Aaron will be quite interested in this one because somebody said, was the number of pit stops a record in this race at Zandvoort? He's something to do with the record here. What's he on about? A bit of trivia too. Lap 3 featured 63 overtakes. Did it? Really? Which, according to someone on Reddit, catching something is a record in Formula One, as was the total number of overtakes in the race, 186. Okay. Yeah, for people that look at these things, I mean, when is an overtake an overtake? Is an overtake when somebody's cruising around on, well, sorry, tiptoeing around on slicks and the other guy's on intermediates? Does that count as an overtake? And this is me always being a bit cynical about stats, but to me an overtake is 2 cars, same compound, basically the same number of laps on the tyres, no DRS, and one of them outbraking the other into a corner or passing him on the outside or whatever. That's an overtake with a capital O. Oh, I love these live streams and I can rant like this. This is Galileo 34. Nice name. I'm sure that 34 has some significance. I'm sure I should know what it is. Galileo. He was a clever guy, wasn't he? Right, here we go. There's another one. Good evening, Peter. Love your videos. Oh, thank you very much. Who do you think was the quicker driver at their absolute peak? Kimi or Fernando? Oh, and in the races from the previous one, which I didn't delete. Sorry about that. At their absolute peak, Kimi or Fernando? You mean Fernando right now? You know, I think, you know, if a number of my friends stroke engineer mates stroke authorities were asked that question, they would all say, well, you know, if you could combine Kimi's talent with Fernando's talent, you would have the perfect racing driver, because here you had this guy that was virtually unbeatable over 1 lap. Absolutely brilliant. And there's Fernando, who wasn't so good under 1 lap, around one lap, but could drive anything anywhere. And on a Sunday, there was nobody better. He could bring the car home, could live with all the variables and maximize them. So you take your pick, really. You're talking about the fastest racing driver out of those two? I would say Kimi Räikkönen. You're saying the driver that would, over a full race season in a car which 50% of the time has front or rear wing damage or side pod damage, Fernando Alonso. Yeah, I mean, Kimi was a very good racing driver too. I shouldn't sell him short. He was a very good racing driver, and we shouldn't just think, oh well, he was a quick qualifier or whatever. He was a good racing driver. And Fernando obviously has his moments as well as a qualifier as well. I don't know. I would say you've asked the question quicker, and I would say Kimi. Shoot me down in flame, but I'm a massive Fernando fan. I'd hate anybody to think that I wasn't. Okay, here's a good question from Leighton. Very good question. Thank you very much, Leighton. Just get this going up here. This is, this really is something that I think is to the credit of Red Bull powertrains. How were Red Bull able to achieve success with Honda, but McLaren were not? What was the difference? Well, at the risk of saying I told you so, when McLaren re-signed with Honda and said that they were going to set up a base in Japan and there were going to be 1,000 people working on the whole project there, and Honda were going to do this and Honda were going to, I remember saying at the time, and I was doing a lot of TV at the time for F1, this doesn't smell right, because in my experience, and I don't think Honda's changed very much, I said then, the way to run Honda is to get on top of them, to maximize their ability to make things very quickly, do things quickly, respond quickly, to have a lot of people involved if they need to, but to manage it in a very slick racing way from a position of an engineer or a couple of engineers who really know how to design and build an engine, of which there are several in Formula One, Adrian Newey being one. And I couldn't see who that person was at McLaren, and I always thought that letting Honda do their own thing in Japan was going to be a major problem. And so it proved. I just don't think there was any, I don't think there was any relationship really that worked between Honda and McLaren. There was no synchronicity. There was no understanding of what McLaren wanted, no understanding of what McLaren felt the right thing would be for the power unit at that stage. And there was no control over Fernando Alonso, to be honest, and I don't think he helped by starting quite early on to slag Honda off quite viciously in the media, and that of course filtered its way back to Japan, and the Japanese do react very badly to that, loyalty and dignity and all that, and so that didn't help. But the main problem was that they just let Honda get on with it, and when Red Bull, I've got to put in my little conjunction here, which is my going up to Helmut Marko in the year before they went to Honda, when they were still running Renault and in trouble and not happy with Renault at all, saying, Helmut, I don't know why you guys don't go with Honda, because for sure Honda are not happy with the way McLaren have been handling them or treating them, because they're paying all the bills. It's free engines to McLaren, and now's the moment to go in with Honda, show your faith. These guys, if you run them well from Milton Keynes, and don't forget there was already a BTCC set up there for Honda British Touring Car Championship thing, with Adrian on top of it, this could really work well for the future. And Helmut Marko said, you are an idiot, get out of my office. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And then 12 months later, of course, they did the Honda deal. So thank you very much, Helmut, for that. But anyway, moving on from that, it was no surprise then, once Adrian and the boys got hold of what Honda had and managed it in a Formula One-esque way. This is the deadline, this is the way it's going to be done, this is where the batteries are going to go, this is where we want the water pump, this is where we want the oil pump, this is how we want the turbo, this is the weight we need to achieve. All those things coming from Red Bull to Honda, Bob's your uncle. That's how Honda liked to operate, and that's how they responded, and it was brilliant. So that's where we're at. And it's no wonder now that Red Bull feel confident that they can take what they have and then apply that effectively to their own power unit and brand it with Ford. I'm sure they would like to be with Honda still, and they're probably a bit annoyed that Honda went out and now they're coming back with Aston Martin. But I think they've got enough there. They got enough from Honda to be able now to take that into the future. And it all comes down to really good Formula One engineers who understand engines and power units. And of course, that science has changed with the advent of hybrid engines, KERS, ERS, and so forth. But that's, there are a lot of good young Formula One people, again, on top of that. So so long as you're running the company well, a big company like Honda well, Formula One wise, you're always going to get the result. It'll be really interesting, I think, to see how it goes with Audi and Sauber, because it's a different thing to be doing a Formula One engine. It's different from doing a long distance endurance sports car engine. Audi have all that experience, but still they are going to need the discipline that will come from an Adrian Newey type person. And who that person is at, whether that's James Key, I don't know, probably is, I don't know. But I mean, James was there, of course, when it was the Honda thing. So maybe he's learned from that as well. So that would be my take on that. McLaren would just, and then I think, when Zach Brown took over, he just thought, we've got to get rid of Honda and we'll become a Mercedes customer engine. We've got to get results. And I think, that was a big thing, because it meant throwing away a lot of money. It was a £24 million annual delta that he threw away, because he was losing the free engines and buying the customer engines. It was a huge thing. And has it really, yes, they won a race or two, but has it really justified that amount of money? If they'd approached the Honda thing in a completely different way, and Zach had the opportunity to do that, new management, etc., then they could be getting from that engine what what Red Bull have been getting from it, I think, if they'd been managed well. So next question, this is from Kopi J. Okay. Hi Peter, Lewis suggested that he could keep up with Red Bull, more specifically Max's pace. What was Lewis's pace like on the first and second soft stints? Well, I put that I put this up earlier. This is Lewis. This is when the track was at its quickest, and there's Lewis compared with Fernando, and Fernando couldn't live with Max. So I think that kind of answers your question. I don't know where that's coming from. To me, that's, I think on intermediates, let's have a look. Let's have a look at this, if we can do this. I've got some pages here, which might give us some sort of indication of where we're at. Let me make sure they're the right ones. Lewis Hamilton. I'm not sure I've got Max Verstappen here, oddly. Should have, probably. 1 second. Don't go away. I'm just going to look, see if I've got Max Verstappen's race lap analysis here. Should be a little bit organised, but so many bits of paper come out of this thing. On your show. I'm going to, let me have a look, 1 second. As I say, I'm just going to, it might be in here, this dossier. Race max speeds. Summary. No, I don't have. Oh, here we go. Got it. Max Verstappen. Here we go. Good. Sorry about all that. So it is only the Monday after the race, so I think I'm allowed a little. I hope the camera's still okay. I'm allowed a bit of a break. So let's have a look. And what would Lewis's pace on the first and second soft stint? So we know what's. So in that period that we talked about, that comparison period, Max, say lap 50 to lap 60, Max was doing 13.9, 14.2, 14.2, 14.2, 14.4, 14.4, 14.0, 13.8, 13.9, pretty consistently quicker than Lewis. So let's have a look at sort of, I don't know, lap 27 to lap 36. So Lewis 16.6, 16.2, 16.4, 16.4, 15.8. Max 15.6, 15.6, 15.4, 15.3, 15.4, 15.3, 15.2. And Max, also I think there's another point, and that is Max for sure is driving with a lot in hand as well. And I would imagine Lewis was pretty much flat out at that stage, making up for the poor start of the race. I'm not, I think there's no doubt Lewis probably could have matched and would have matched Perez, but no way in the world he could have matched Max's pace if Max was Max, flat out. And I think those numbers prove it. And if the Mercedes was so good, why couldn't he pass Carlos Sainz? That's a big question I think that needs to be answered at the end of the race. Okay. Another good one. And while I'm on Carlos Sainz, I thought he drove very well, actually. I think, it's a bit of a cliche these days. We got the maximum out of the car. Well, of course, he got the maximum out of the car. That's what he's paid to do. But I think, when drivers say that, what they really mean is there were a lot of things wrong with this car, but I kind of brought it home. And it's a nice way of not talking about all the things that were not very good. But he had good top speed, Sainz, so he maximized that. And we saw that in the comparison I showed earlier. And it wasn't a good car otherwise. And, to drive as well as he did under pressure, when it was very easy to make a mistake in those last laps on intermediates, I thought he did a very good job. What a messy weekend for Charles Leclerc, eh? Unbelievable. I mean, the number of times he went down the escape road, 3 times, I think, in qualifying, on Saturday anyway, at turn 1, Tarzan, and then, in the race, shunt with, if you qualify where he did, you're going to have a first corner shunt probably. Yeah, he did with Oscar Piastri. Didn't look that big, but I mean, it seemed to damage the front wing and then irretrievably damage the floor of the Ferrari as well. I suppose these floors are so sensitive with all those things they have there, teeth, shark's teeth and strakes and everything, that you lose half of those and then you destroy the tyres and the whole race is over. Anyway, this is XYFUF XTXXYF. You pronounce it, not I. Hi, Peter. I have a question with Monza coming up. Why is Monza considered Ferrari country, even though Imola is closer to Maranello? It's a good question. I think it's because, for a long time there was no Grand Prix staged at Imola. It didn't stage a race until '63, and it didn't stage a championship race until 83-ish time. 82 was, it was around the championship, but didn't have all the British teams in it. So it doesn't have a massive history in Formula One terms, whereas Monza's been around, one of the first permanent circuits built in Europe. I mean, it was been around since the 20s, and so therefore was always, if you like, Ferrari's home race, synonymous with Ferrari Milan, and don't forget, for a long time, Fiat was synonymous with Ferrari. Not synonymous, but played a major part in Ferraris. They were in Turin, and that's quite near Milan, and so that would have added up to it. But, there's another point here, which is, it's good that you asked the question, because Ferrari's history at Monza is actually very bittersweet. He's had some incredible arguments with the Italian Automobile Federation over the years, and he's had some horrendous tragedies at Monza. And, I think if what circuit would have been closest to Ferrari's heart, he probably would have said Modena, actually. That was the test track where Ferrari, they'd never staged a Grand Prix there, but it's a test track where they did a lot of testing, obviously. Not only Ferrari, but many teams in the 50s and 60s. So Monza, because it is the Italian Grand Prix, and I suppose they did own Imola, didn't they? It was a Ferrari circuit, and it was run by Roberto Nosetto for quite a long time, ex-Ferrari team manager. And then they took over Mugello more as their thing. But Imola, Yeah, I think it's just a question of history. In answer to your question, you know, it goes back to the 20s. I mean, you think about Ferrari in 33. Well, before that, there was that massive shunt at Monza when I think 15 spectators were killed. In 33, two of Ferrari's Alpha drivers were killed on the same day. And then you had the Von Trips accident in 61. You know, a lot of very bad things have happened for Ferrari at Monza. Equally, some very good things, you know, brilliant things. Like, for example, you know, the 1-2 in 66. Talk about retribution. I mean, that was a brilliant thing. Ludovico Scarfiotti, Clay Regazzoni, and no, not Clay Regazzoni. What am I saying? Mike Parks. Sorry about that. And then Clay winning in 70, and Mario coming back 82 to get the pole, and then in 88 Ferrari 1-2, the only non-McLaren win of that year, just after Ferrari had passed away. So a lot of history for Ferrari at Monza. Yeah, that's a good question though. You know, I think a lot of Italians would say, well, you know, we love Imola, but we love Monza too. I love Monza. I love Monza's atmosphere. Not quite the same these days. You know, the old cobblestone paddock in the old days used to be there to look at. Now it's sort of all, half of it's disappeared, and then there's the paddock club and everything, and it's quite difficult to sort of touch and feel the old Monza there, but you can still get quite a lot of the feel if you just hang around the circuit and when you're having dinner and the nearby towns, and just generally the atmosphere there is wonderful. You know, it spells motor racing, and if you're lucky enough to stay at the Fossati Hotel and have their risotto formaggi, it is the best meal. Somebody asked me the other day, what's your favorite all-time meal? I think it would be risotto formaggi from the Fossati Hotel in Canonica, something like that. Canonica, near on the outside of the Lesmos. Unbelievable. One of the great things, it's all bright yellow, sort of saffron in there. Amazing thing. So yeah, Monza, Imola. It is coming up. Looking forward to it. And that Ferrari top speed, by the way, won't necessarily carry through to Monza, because that top speed of Ferrari that I showed earlier is more about how little downforce Ferrari were generating around Monza, around Zandvoort, than it was about how efficient they are with their aero. And what will happen at Monza, of course, is that everyone will be running smaller wings and looking for top speed. So very different thing there. It's just a reply about this pit crew thing from Aaron Lear. Pit crew have eyes and they can see that a car is coming in or out of the pit box nearby. Oh, okay. Well, I think also they do get a warning, because not all of them will be looking up the pit lane at any given moment, that's for sure. Takes me back to the Williams days though, because you know, Patrick Head was a firm believer that the less the mechanics know, the better. And quite often as team manager, I spoke to Frank and Patrick about making sure that all the mechanics were on the radio, so they had a rough clue of what was going on and could listen and get a feel for what the drivers were saying and thinking. And Patrick said, absolutely not. The last thing we need is the mechanics getting involved and you know, making decisions of their own. They'll wait until they're told what to do. I don't know, he was probably right at the time. They seem very disciplined these days, don't they? And very switched on, all the mechanics. Half of them seem to be, you know, engineers almost. Very, very impressive to see them these days. W.C. Robinson, evening Peter. Where do you realistically see Albon's career path going? He's been so impressive this year and seems a very likeable and down-to-earth character. Thanks as always. Well, as I've said several times already, that wasn't me talking to you. That was me just saying, I just wish that this would happen. I would love to see him back at Red Bull in the other car. Nothing against Sergio Perez, but I think he would be at a better number two to Max than Perez, because I think he's going to be less annoyed by having to finish second behind Max, because it'll be a real novelty for him to finish second. He'll win the Grand Prix or two in that car for sure, and I don't think he will. And I think he'll gel quite well with the way Max runs the car anyway. Max and Adrian run the car, whereas I don't think you get, you know, whereas with Perez in the semi-wet and locks up and goes off and does these things and complains about the brakes or whatever, I don't think you'll get that with Alex Albon. And so I'd love to see that happen. And I do know that, you know, because of his Thai nationality, that the Thai part owner of Red Bull is very interested in Alex's career. And it wouldn't be impossible that they might make that switch and get him back to Red Bull. Now, it could be that Williams will say, under no circumstances will we release Alex Albon. But of course, money does talk, and eventually that might well, as Dexter enters the room. As I say, money does talk. Dexter enters the studio. Now he leaves. Hi, Dex. My dog. As money talks, and if they really want him, I think they would get him. To me, it's the logical thing. Getting back to Red Bull, it's not the first time that would have happened, and that's where I see it going. Beyond that, I think he's obviously in quite a good position now at Williams. He's doing well. The team's doing well. It's on the way up. Why would he want to leave unless it was something really good? But if he was to get an offer from, I suppose if he got an offer from Audi, he would probably think about that, or for 26, or he might go to McLaren if such an opportunity arose. But right now, he's not badly off. I mean, the good news is his career's kind of sorted now. He doesn't have to worry about what he's going to be doing on a Monday morning when he wakes up. He knows that he's basically kind of there or thereabouts. Really good drive, to do what he did yesterday. As I say, I mean, he set the standard of what Mercedes could have done had they stayed out. If Alex Albon can do that, for sure Lewis and George can. So go to the next one. This is what's this then? Amol Abeth. Hi Peter, great content as always. Thank you very much, Anmol, sorry, misreading that. Not much is said about how good the Red Bull pit crew's performance. Vettel, Abu Dhabi 2010, Brazil 2012, Daniel, China 18. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Well, we kind of take that for granted as well. They are really good. And these days, we almost take for granted that with the 18-inch wheels, it's going to be a mega stop. But these are big wheels. And that's part of the reason I think that issue occurred on the Prema car in Formula 2. But they're all pretty good, aren't they? But Red Bull, very, very slick. Not incapable of making mistakes, but very good at correcting themselves when they do. And all credit to Jonathan Wheatley, I think, and the teams that he's had to work with. And he's had chief mechanics come and go, but the consistency has always been there. And when you see Red Bull out there on the pit apron practicing and doing their thing, it is like watching any world-class athletic team doing their thing. Everybody's harmonious, everything's worked in sync, and they practice the difficult things, the nose changes, the stacked pit stops with the nose changes. And what happens if suddenly we get the wrong tire on the wrong wheel on the wrong side? How do we react to that? All those things you have to practice, and a lot of that will be over the winter as well. A lot of talk about having the time off, but there won't be. I mean, they have an electric car in the shop floor at Red Bull, which they use for their pit stop practice, and that's because of a noise thing, and obviously just so they can get the movement and a bit of heat going. And all credit to them. I don't know how many other teams do that, but that shows the sort of attention to detail that they have at Red Bull. Incredible, really. Brilliant team. Best team in racing. Astonishing still, if you think about it, that Daniel Ricciardo just walked away from it thinking, I'm not going to get beaten by Max. I'm going to leave. And he went to Renault, and he could have been there all this time. Here we go. Next one. I'm not sure. I've seen the first sentence of this. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer it, actually. I'm not very good on these ones, but we'll see how we go. This is from Mike Bartel. Max was born in Belgium, so why does he compete under the Dutch flag? Isn't Spa his real home race? I can't really answer that, other than to say that Jos Verstappen was Dutch. Max has always said he was Dutch. He's always said he was born quite near the border, and that Spa obviously is very close to his heart. But he's never made any, it's never been confusing about his Dutch, as far as I know, his Dutch nationality, and he's always been very upfront about that. Is it a bit like the Nico Rosberg thing when, he's the son of Keke Rosberg, who's Finnish, obviously, but his mother's German, I think. And then Nico's mum was German, and then Nico was raised in Germany as a result, and therefore, I think it's called German, isn't he? He races under the German, or raced under the German flag. But it's not even like that with Max. I think he's always been Dutch. In the same way that Marnus Labuschagne is Australian, even though he's South African. Australian cricketer. So yeah, I think when it comes down to the Belgian Grand Prix time, it's very easy for the Dutch and the Dutch Belgians, if that's the right word, shouldn't call them that probably, to go across the border to Belgium and watch Spa and cheer for Max with all the orange, and then there's the home race at Zandvoort. I don't know. That's what I see it like that. Anyway, doesn't really answer your question because I don't know enough about his passport situation. Well, this is T. Koning. His father is born in the Netherlands and he went to school in Sittard. There you go. Not sure where Sittard is, but anyway, I think that answers the question, hopefully. Okay, another one from Koning. His own words. He competes with a Dutch racing license because he says he feels more Dutch, spends more time with his father than with his mother, and has always been surrounded by Dutch people. There you go. Verstappen said in 2015, I actually only lived in Belgium to sleep, but during the day I went to the Netherlands and I also had my friends there. I was raised as a Dutchman and that's how I feel. Oh, well, there you go. Thank you very much, T. Koning, for all that. Very good. Sam Van Haren says, hi, Peter. Martin Thielen says, okay, try and have a look at this one. There's some smiley faces here. I'm not sure these come out on my platform here. We'll have a look. Unlikely. I can't imagine that it's good enough for that, but we'll see. Don't think it did. What's going on here? Have I not copied everything? Oh, I seem to have made a mess of this one. Let me go back. Sorry about that. What have I done wrong here? Oh, that's all right. It's not working, is it? Something odd here. I don't know why there's the other one. Sorry about this. This is very show yourself. Some Dutch Formula programs. There we go. I forget that last bit. What's probably the next question? Sorry about Pa Changao. Hi, Peter. First discovered you through an interview with Lewis Hamilton. Okay, we'll get on with that. The other one is Martin Thielen. Hi, Peter. When will you visit us here in the Netherlands? Show yourself by some Dutch Formula One programs as commentator. You have my vote, e.g. Ziggo or NOS. Viaplay has the rights, but is the most boring. Oh, well, I don't know about that. I'm sure they all do a very good job. I do love Holland. I've spent quite a lot of time there. Have a bit of history there as well, personal history, which is why I know the country very well or pretty well. And I love Zandvoort. Love Zandvoort. Every race I've ever attended at Zandvoort, I was there in 73, very sadly. But other Zandvoorts have always been great races. Just great weekends. And I was around when you could stay in the Bouw's Palace and walk to the track, and I'm sure it's all very different now, more built up. But yeah, I love it. And I'll never forget, actually, this is not a long story, but I might as well tell it. 67, when I was a kid, my mum and dad, my dad actually had a bit of leave, holiday time, worked for a British company, and they said you can come back for 3 months every 4 years, on leave, they called it. I don't think they have leave anymore, to the UK from Australia. And so I went with them, and this is 67, early 67. And when I was there, of course, I persuaded them to take our rental Cortina, for Dad to drive it up to Scotland to see Jim Clark's town, Duns, and we saw his house. But of course, by then he had left Scotland, and he was living in Scotland. Living in France. There you go. Sorry, I'm just adjusting this. And then I persuaded my cousin to take me to the Daily Express International Trophy meeting at Silverstone, which was amazing. Mike Parkes won in the Ferrari. Vic Elford won his class in the red 911 in the touring car race. Brilliant. Peter Westbury won the Formula 3 race. And then I persuaded my dad to go with Page and Moy to the Monaco Grand Prix, 67. So I was there. Chicane on Saturday, station hairpin on Sunday. And then that all finished. I also persuaded my mum to take me up to the new Lotus factory at Norfolk, and we did a couple of other things, motor racing wise. The whole thing was great. Anyway, then I had to fly back because school was starting. It was the first time I'd ever flown on my own, so I had to fly back on my own. I was 14. And the idea was that I stayed with this family in Amsterdam for a couple of days because I had to fly back KLM in a 707. And there was a sort of network of families where you could do it. It wasn't exchange, but if you're an international student, as it were, you could stay with this family for a couple of days and get to know their country. So I went to Amsterdam and we went down the canals and did some cycling. Everything was really good. Got in the 707 to fly back. And as we took off, I had a window seat. And as we took off, I thought, I wonder where Zandvoort is. I looked out the window and there was Zandvoort below me, just in front of the wing. And I just saw this circuit, Zandvoort, right by the sea. And I've always thought, wow, the odds of that happening were 1,000,000 to 1, really. I know they all sort of fly over there, but for me to have a seat where I can actually see it, and I looked out at exactly the right moment. It was quite a cloudy day as well. To see Zandvoort, I've always thought that was meant to be, really. And to think that then just a month or two later, that is where Jim Clark then won the Dutch Grand Prix in the Lotus 49 in 67. And then much later, I was going to drive that Lotus 49, not that one, but a Lotus 49, green and yellow, around Zandvoort myself. So yeah, Zandvoort's always had a lot going for it, and great circuit. And thank you very much for your kind comments about it. I love to do a bit of TV periodically, but not, now I've got a lovely family here in Spain. It actually takes quite a lot for me to to get up and leave and go and do something else, the dog, Dexter, Jack, the golf, everything. It's brilliant here. So right, now you got a bit of that previous one. I'll go back and stick it on here. What am I doing now? Completely confused. Here we go. It's all a bit messy, this, isn't it? It's because I haven't done a live stream for a while. That's what happens, Windsor, when you haven't done a live stream for a while. You go through all these pains of not getting the questions exactly right. So actually, to be honest with you, there isn't a lot of time to be doing live streams at the moment. I'm going to be doing a video tomorrow, recording a video tomorrow with a very special guest. And then, of course, the 3 videos coming up for Monzo. So I don't know if there's a lot of time. This is from Pa Changa. Hi, Peter. First discovered you through the interview with Lewis Hamilton, I think back in 2017. How difficult is it for you to get the likes of Lewis or Max for an interview? And can we expect more? It's actually quite difficult on the platform that we're using at the moment, YouTube, like this, because with the drivers now, they have so many requests for interviews, point one. Point two, the people managing the exposure of the drivers in the team are always going to look for the maximum exposure for the sponsor at any given moment. That takes priority. And then number 3, it has to be something that will maximize the time that the driver's going to spend. So when it's the racing season, they say, oh, it's really busy, let's talk at the end of the year or the August break. And you get to the August break at the end of the year and, oh no, they're away having a rest. So Formula One's pretty geared up these days for doing its interviews, very short interviews, soundbite stuff, clickbait if you like, at Grand Prix. And then beyond that, everybody just clams up. So I haven't given up on it because there have been lots of occasions when I have and will be talking to these drivers, but for other things and other platforms and other shows and other things. But so far as YouTube goes, quite difficult. Even I would say it's quite difficult to justify their time, even though we'll have a pretty good audience and the fans would love it. And over a Grand Prix weekend, I'll have average of 200,000 views, maybe 250. Which is about the same as most Grand Prix over a 3-day weekend as well. So it's not far off what the attendance of a Grand Prix is. So in that sense, you could argue, yeah, it would probably be pretty good exposure. But I I don't know. I mean, I can probably get quite a lot of F1 drivers other than the top 3 or 4, but is it worth all the time and trouble and hassle? That's kind of how I think, and I can just talk anyway about it. What I ought to do is some interviews where I just interview a driver and ask the questions, and then I give the answers as well, because 9 times out of 10 you know what they're going to say. But yeah, I take your point, and I'm being a bit silly here really. I don't know. I think I'm due to be interviewing Lewis fairly soon on something else. Max, haven't got anything in line with Max at the moment, but there might be something coming up as well towards the end of the year with Max. But whether or not it'll translate to something I can do on YouTube, I don't know. Probably not. Sorry, it's the bad news. So you just have to put up with me in the meantime. So right, let's go back to where we were, which is that's the studio, and here we are. Here are the questions. Okay, Sam Van Haren, who I think we've heard from already today, but that's great, no problem. If people want to ask 10, 20, 30, 40 questions, it's no problem for me at all. It's always good to be talking to people that are interested in and love Formula One. Love is an overused word. I think interested in understanding Formula One, I think, is probably the what I find. You know, it's a very complicated sport, and to try to actually get one's head around it is not easy. Sam Van Haren, hi Peter, loving these streams. Thank you very much, Sam. One quick question: what about Senna's driving style made him so quick? Because I recall you saying he had slightly longer corners. Thanks. Yes, he does. He did have slightly longer corners, but he was incredibly precise, and his margins were probably smaller than any driver I've ever seen, other than Nigel Mansell. And I say, I mean, Jim Clark. I did see Jim Clark drive, but because he was of that era, it wasn't that he left margin. It was just the way the cars were without downforce. You could slide a car and you could sort of create margin while still being on the limit. Whereas Ayrton was just, everything was down to the millimeter. But slightly longer corners. You know, he never really understood why Nigel was as quick as he was. And he never understood why Nigel went into corners slightly earlier than he did. But he had unbelievable touch, incredible coordination in an era when he had to heel and toe on downshifts, and obviously upshifts were manual. Everything was manual in the car, 3-pedal car. Very staccato, not staccato, but sort of blipping the throttle mid-corner, waiting for the moment when he knew he could get on the power. And wouldn't just jab the throttle with full power. It would still be fed in correctly. But in order to find that moment, he used to just play with his right foot on the edge of the throttle, which was always slightly odd, I thought. It wasn't a turbo thing. It helped him possibly a little bit in the turbo era, but he had it in Formula 3 and even Ford 2000. So it was a characteristic that he always had, that he told me he'd always had since karting anyway. And it was just his way of feeling the moment when the rear was there. And just painstaking attention to detail in every aspect of his race weekend, or indeed his test day, whether it be looking at the way the wind direction was changing, the effect it would have, changing track surface conditions, start procedures for the support race that might be relevant to what he might be facing in the Grand Prix proper. When he did a track walk, he was looking at all the things off the track that he might want to avoid if he was off circuit, as distinct from most of the track walks today, which, as far as I can see, are only based on what they can see on the tarmac. Just incredible attention to detail. And I mentioned this before, you know, he experimented with holding his breath as long as possible around a qualifying lap to heighten the blood going into his brain. And, you know, that's extreme, but obviously it shows the level of commitment that Ayrton had to the lap. Whereas, and I think he found it difficult to understand why Prost was as quick as he was as well, because Prost always looked pretty much on rails compared with Ayrton, whether Ayrton was following him or watching him. But Prost was a short corner driver as well, not to the commitment level of a Lewis or a Max or a Nigel in the back half of his career, but certainly in the first half of his career, absolutely at that level. And I don't think Ayrton really ever got his head around the importance of shortening the corner entry a little bit, and the way the weight transfer could be used to your advantage just before the transition zone. And I remember Bruno Senna doing a couple of days with Rob Wilson once when he was in Formula 2. And after the second day with Rob, he looked at Rob and he said, "That was just amazing. I've done things here that I've never touched before in terms of karting, Formula 3. You're talking about real things to do with really driving the car." And he said, and he looked Rob in the eye and said, "I can tell you now, my uncle would have loved a day like this, lots of days like this with you." And I always, maybe Bruno was wrong about that, I don't know. But I've always thought, I imagine Ayrton would have loved the way Rob Wilson thinks about driving and the art of driving and the science of driving. He would have loved it. And he would have got something out of it, I'd be willing to bet. So, yeah, that's my Ayrton, really. Quite political guy. I mean, Johnny Cecotto didn't enjoy having Ayrton as a teammate, I don't think. He wasn't particularly nice towards Nigel, but he had his mates. He was very fond of Maurizio Gugelmin, was always trying to help Maurizio and get him into Formula 1. And I don't think Derek Warwick, actually, just going back to that, I don't think Derek Warwick was that big a fan because he basically blocked Derek's Lotus career. So, but then again, Johnny Dumfries got the drive, didn't he? So, yeah, he was a political guy like that. And, when he was at McLaren, I suppose the other thing, if you think about it now, is that Ayrton, and I've never really thought of this before, but Ayrton probably thought that part of the reason, or a lot of the reason Honda have gone to McLaren is because of me. Okay, Ron's put the deal together and he's the man, but ultimately, if he didn't have me, he may not have had Honda agree to all the terms that he had, and I'm certainly a part of this Honda package. And I suppose there might have been a bit of inner resentment with Prost then benefiting from the Honda deal that Ayrton had partly instrumented. I may be wrong, I'm just thinking that now. Possibly that's one of the reasons there was a little bit of friction between the two. Well, I think Prost probably would have been okay initially, but then they would have found he would have felt that there was never going to be a close friendship with Ayrton. But Ayrton was very, he was very naughty in traffic. And he was the first guy I've ever seen who was that blatant about brake testing and a lot of the things that you shouldn't do beyond Formula Ford, really. And he took them right into Formula One. And, that was, and then Michael, I think, probably fed off that, and a bit more clumsily probably, but Michael probably wouldn't have been as dirty as he was on occasions if it hadn't been for Ayrton. So there's that to be remembered as well about Ayrton, I think. Okay, here we go. Now this is this question I think I mentioned earlier. This is quite a good question, I think. You guys can sort of see what I'm doing. I'm just shortening these sentences just to get them right. And I think there's some question about pronunciation of Dutch words. Again, I've already been given a hard time about mispronouncing Max's name. I hope I've got that pretty much right now. Martin Thielen, how is it possible, I think we've had you before anyway, that Checo can't match Max's pace in the wet? Not because of the short corners, because Max had long corners, especially in the Hugenholzbocht. Yeah, I can pronounce that because that's named after John Hugenholtz, who was the designer of the circuit, wonderful man, and also designed Suzuka. And so we should still be in awe of his architectural skills, I think. But as I say, Max was not, you would have seen Max using shorter corners when he was on slicks and the track was dry, and if Perez was near him, you would have definitely seen him turning in earlier. But when there's dampness or it's wet, as I said before, Max is not, you're not going to see short corners from Max. What you're going to see is a driver who's incredibly sensitive to where the grip is on the corner. And that could be on the outside, could be braking to the outside of a corner is not an easy thing to do. If you think about it, you're always thinking, in Max's case, you're thinking transition zone, braking to that point. And if you're a Carlos Sainz, you're thinking there's the apex, brake in a straight line, get the car in. But if you're maximizing a car in the wet and the grip is on the outside of a corner, you've got to brake to that point. And that's not easy. It's a different thing to be doing. Max does that incredibly well. Point one. Point two, everything he does is in perfect harmony and sync with what the car is telling him is going on. So all his inputs, whether it's steering, throttle, brakes, release of brake pedal pressure, all of them are in harmony with what the car is doing at any given moment. The car is floating, and so is Max almost on the controls. And that ability, that rate of input of the arms and the feet ability is exactly the ability he has that enables him to create the short corners in the dry. But in the wet, you see it in the car just settling down and looking as if it's on rails almost. He has the occasional, oversteer moment probably, but generally speaking, you don't see him having lurid moments under braking or getting into the corner. Whereas you do with Perez, because Perez all his inputs are just slightly sharper, spikier. And because of that, the car is reacting more to everything he does. Yeah, he's a late braker. Yeah, he's got great feel for when to put the power down. But in order to maximize that great feel for traction, he's got to have at least a half reasonable first half to the corner. And that requires very, very good high-speed braking, in the case of Zandvoort, in a number of places, having a very stable platform that allows him to get the car to the point where he can display his ability under traction. And that's, still what he has a problem with, in my view. And that's where you see him. He always goes off on the entry to corners, not on the exits. I think it's a pretty fair comment. Whereas Max is always making it look easy. And that's because his inputs are so good. That's where it's coming from. But thanks for that. Good question and well observed. It sounds a bit patronizing. I don't mean that. I mean, what I mean is it's good to know people are looking at more than just, the car going around the corner. People are starting to look at what the drivers are doing and where they're positioning the cars. And Sam Van Heren said, interesting question, would like to hear the response. Well, I think, hopefully that response makes sense. Hope we hear this response in 15 minutes, says Martin Thielen. That was probably about half an hour ago. Sorry about that. Right, this is Dennis Y, says, hey Peter, love your shows. Thank you very much. Elliot Davidson. Okay, here's a question from Elliot Davidson. Let's have a look at that one, see what this one's all about. It's going back to the time available to do live streams. There's not a lot. So, this will be the last one, obviously, until after Monza, and then I'll have a look at what we can do after Monza. I'm actually going to Singapore myself, so that's going to take quite a big slice out of that week in the build-up to Singapore. Probably won't be able to do any live there. Be struggling to get the recorded videos done, I think, from there. Elliot Davidson. Hi, Peter. Love the content, especially in this format. Thank you very much. Which combo would be most menacing to see in your mirrors on a Sunday? Hamilton all-black Mercedes, Senna, Dayglow McLaren, Schumacher Ferrari, or Verstappen Red Bull? Most menacing. Wow, I think I'd be most menaced by Ayrton Senna in a Dayglow McLaren, because you wouldn't know what he was going to do next, really. If you think about what he did to Prost a couple of times at Suzuka, once at the chicane, once at turn one, what he did to Nigel a few times, Spa, brake testing, what he did to Brundle a number of times in Formula 3, you'd be thinking, Ayrton Senna. Let me think it through. Lewis all black. Yeah, it's quite impressive, Lewis all black Mercedes. Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about what Lewis would do in traffic. If we were alongside racing, I'd know he'd be pretty fair. Well, would be very fair, I think. Senna, I would be worried about, and Michael, I'd be worried about. Verstappen, I wouldn't be worried about Verstappen, but if it was 2023 and I wasn't in a Red Bull, I'd be just waving him past, I think. So I wouldn't be worried about him at all. Yeah. So there we go. Thank you. Good, funny question. Very funny question. Yeah, 89 pit stops. Is that a record from Michael? Don't know. It could be. We've had plenty of races where there have been a lot of changes of weather conditions. So it's going to be another race with similar. There was that famous Silverstone, wasn't there? What was that? 07, 08 or something like that. There was a lot of ins and outs all the time. So, and there was, of course, a moment when, of course, people may not have been counting all these pit stops anyway. Anyway, is a pit stop, because of weather conditions, the same as a pit stop because as a loose wheel nut and you're coming in to get it refound? I mean, what defines a pit stop? Same way an overtake, you know. What is a podium finish when the races didn't have podiums? I know what they mean, top three and all that stuff, but okay, 189 overtakes is a record for Formula One. Okay, Sebastian Kruger. I'll put this one up. Let's have a look. There we go. When Seb won 9 in a row, how many podiums did he have apart from the wins? Well, you can look that up on Wikipedia. Don't ask me. I don't think he had that many podiums in it. He probably had at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 other wins that year, didn't he? Did he have a lot of podiums? I'm not sure he did. But yeah, he did win those 9. Quite impressive when you think about it. But he had that blown diffuser and all that stuff, didn't he? So it was a very, very good car, very like the Red Bull is today, you know, in terms of its advantage, I suppose. Oh, this is a message from me saying I might be a bit delayed about the internet. Okay. Okay, Mr. Windsor. Here's an interesting question. Now, this is an interesting question. Not sure I understand it, really. Let me have a look. He says, how is Lando consistently able to beat Oscar despite his longer corners? Well, is he consistently able to beat Oscar? I think Oscar's been, bear in mind he's a rookie. Bear in mind he's learning, and there's lots of stuff that you can only get in your head in actually racing a car in Formula One. You can't predict them, you can't simulate these things, you've got to just live them and experience them. And whether it's, you know, how to warm the tyres up in Q2 when there's a weather change, or whether it's how to perform in a stacked pit stop, all those things you can only do with experience. So that first needs to be said about Oscar Piastri. Second, he's gone unbelievably well, hasn't he, for a rookie in that situation, bearing in mind how well Lando has driven over the last 3 or 4 years, and how quick he is, and how good and how soft his touch is as well. But he does have has longish corners compared with Max or Lewis, or yes, as you say, Oscar definitely has shorter corners, and that's one of the reasons he's so good. But I don't know. Let's have a look at fastest race laps from the Dutch Grand Prix from memory, and this is only memory. I think here we go. Oscar Piastri 14.2, Lando Norris 14.3. So yeah, Oscar. That was the first time we've seen Oscar since Oscar's been kind of there or thereabouts and pretty near Lando. It's the first time he's dropped it and made a mistake and crashed, and it bit him in qualifying. I did actually, in the qualifying video that I recorded, I had to shorten it because of the internet problems I was mentioning. I just didn't want to have too long a video to have to upload. But one of the things I cut out was the following. I said this: I was a bit surprised that Oscar Piastri wasn't quicker when they put the red tyres on in that last 1 lap blitz in Q3, because this is the biggest margin we've seen between Lando and Oscar since Oscar's been, you know, up to speed, as it were. And I went through all the sectors, and he was just down a tenth or two on Lando in every sector. And I just concluded that, you know, after the shunt, he was probably leaving a little bit of margin in the dry. And that was kind of borne out by eventually what he said, which was, when I had the shunt, I lost dry weather time. And when the track and when I started again on Saturday in the wet and the intermediates, it was kind of okay because it was a different thing. But when it came to being dry, I didn't have any reference points, and therefore I had to leave a bit of margin. And that's what happened. So that's why he didn't qualify that well. I mean, fair enough. I mean, he qualified pretty well, didn't he? But not as good as Lando, obviously. But then he raced well. I thought he was kind of there or thereabouts. McLaren, like Mercedes, got it all wrong in terms of, I mean, why didn't they split it the way Red Bull did? It was very iffy, wasn't it, what to do on that first lap, because all the predictions had been for lap 4, 5 and 6. Suddenly it's pouring with rain. They're getting rain on the visor even on the formation lap. And Red Bull correctly, in my view, in that situation, split it immediately, brought in Perez and kept Max out just to see whether the rain might ease. And it didn't. It continued and got worse, so they brought him in. And that was the right decision, because Max was at the front of the race and you had no idea what Fernando was going to do, and he was looking good anyway. And if the rain had eased, it would have been, open door to Fernando Alonso at that point. So they made the right choice and they split their options. But Mercedes didn't do that. They just kept the two guys out, and then too late decided to bring them in when they should have left them out, as I said earlier in the live stream tonight. And McLaren, what did McLaren do? I mean, they were, again, you got Oscar Piastri in that car. Why don't you split your options? But let's have a look at what happened with McLaren, because so when did they come in? Lando came in on lap 3, very late, and Oscar came in on, wow, Oscar was on slicks on lap 2, yeah, and then where did he go after that? Let's have a look. 81. And he dropped down to there, and he sank without trace on slicks. Okay, they left him on slicks. Oh, that's cool. I didn't realise that. They left him on slicks, and then he started to pick his way back up through the field. Good on him. So there, good drive. He kept it on the island, on slicks, in the wet. That's self-confidence, and it's the team having confidence in him. So on that basis, you got to say he did a pretty good job. I think he did. I rate him. I mean, the only thing would be what happened. Let's just confirm. Have I got my phone here? Yeah. Just set the tyres out. I didn't realise that. I got to say, I didn't realise that. There was so much going on, wasn't there? Let's look at the tyres just to confirm that. Oscar Piastri started on softs. Yeah, he ran those softs for 15 laps and then put on another set for 31 laps. Yeah, so pretty good. Why didn't Mercedes do that with George, for example? Yeah. So I take, I wouldn't agree that he's actually been slower than Lando. I think taking all that into account, he's right there. And as I said before, for me, long term is a bit of a problem for Lando, because this guy is really good. And I like his attitude as well. He's very, very calm, which is always a good sign. Okay, here's the answer about the Sebastian Vettel thing from Martin Thielsen. It was 2013. He had 4 more wins, and from Spa till Brazil, he won every race. So it doesn't look as if he had any other podium. A podium is a non-win, but in the top 3, I think, isn't it? So I don't think he had any. De Pico. Hi, Peter. Greetings from Breda. Hi there. Thanks very much. Okay, Zad Earl. This looks like a good question. Hi, Peter. It started to rain at the start. Don't you think Ferrari, with a modicum of common sense, should have had the Inters ready before Charles came into the pits? Your thoughts? Yes, I do. Total mess, as ever. Sad, isn't it? Of course they should have. And it's it's incredible to me that Frederick Vasseur hasn't got on top of that. Those sorts of details are exactly the sort of details that are in the control of the team principal and the people he delegates to do the job, and he's watching over them, or should be, in my opinion. And I've always imagined that's what Fred has done so well over the years at ART, and I find it extraordinary that things like that are happening at Ferrari still. Absolutely extraordinary. I've got no other words to say about it, really. I just, whether there's still other people there that he needs to replace, I've no idea. But you heard what I said in the last live stream. I put it out as a video. One of the problems at Ferrari is getting, these days, if you wanted to get good UK-based engineers and management people, is getting them to go to Ferrari because of Brexit and because of how difficult it is to operate in Italy now. And it's a problem. It's obviously a problem. It's just so sad to see that in those situations. Speaking of all that, though, I'm going to repeat what I said on the video on Sunday night, which is I was disappointed that they forced everybody to run intermediates at the final restart. Why did they do that? I suppose they were only thinking we don't want anybody running on slicks and having another accident and delaying it even more, and the TV schedules are going to go. I suppose it was that. But why didn't they say you can run either wets or intermediates in that case? Why did they stop anybody wanting to run extreme wets if they wanted to in that last section? It doesn't make any sense to me at all, because that would have added a bit of spice to it, and there certainly would have been an early lap advantage. It was only a short race, 5-lap race or whatever. It would have added an advantage because you would have been able to heat up the wets better, and you might have had an advantage on that first or second racing lap. So I'm sure if they had allowed it, some people would have run the extreme wet. And I don't know why they did that. It's like, everybody has to start on the soft tyre in the dry or something. Why? Why they have all these rules that come in all the time? I don't like it, to be honest. Right, here we go. That's what it actually says here. Martin Thielson says, internet in Spain is not that consistent. You're having more issues since last week, aren't you? Yeah, I think I've got it hammered out. I've got a plan B here, sort of secondary one backup, which I'm using, and hopefully it's okay. I have to say, in general, I think Spain is incredibly good with its infrastructure and the way the country operates. All the fundamental things work well. I mean, we live in the southeast corner of Spain, and it's been a pretty hot summer. But I've got this nice guy who cleans the pool every Monday, and he was saying that there hasn't been a water shortage here in terms of you're not allowed to water the garden at night or indeed other things for at least 15 years. All the time he's been there. And I said, that's amazing, isn't it? He's English. I said, because in England, if it's hot in the summer, we have 2 weeks of heat, the whole place grinds to a halt and there's talk of drought and this and that. And he said, yeah, it's because Spain is very well organised with infrastructure in a number of ways. And I've got to say, in general, take my hat off, because I think the internet actually is very good here. It's just that I've had a couple of glitches. It was a power outage. That was the issue. And we've got it sorted now, I think. Anyway, thank you for your concern and interest. It's very nice to know that people sympathise. So David, I know what's going to happen here. I'm going to preempt everybody being annoyed by saying I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to get through all the questions because time is running out, and I have got quite a lot of other stuff to get on with tonight. He says, sounding important and busy, but I have. Okay, David. Hi, Peter. Fernando Alonso was quoted yesterday that Max doesn't get the recognition he deserves. What's your take on this? Well, I think he gets the recognition he deserves because I can only speak for myself. I've always said that he was one of the best racing drivers I've ever seen, and I think he's phenomenal in every respect. So, a phenomenon. There you go. So I can't, that's my world. That's my field of perception. Beyond that, who's out there saying that he's not very good or he's not very talented or he's only in a good car or whatever? I mean, you wouldn't be watching what was going on if you said that. Having said all of that, I suspect that in the back of Fernando's mind still, there's a little bit of angst with Lewis, and it's just his way possibly of saying a little bit of, Max is much better than Lewis sort of thing without actually saying that. I guess that's the sort of thing Fernando would do or say, bless him. And so I suspect it's more that than anything else. Fernando, I think, is outwardly quite friendly with Lewis these days and vice versa. But if you get Fernando in a quiet moment, he'll still say, when I retire, I'll tell the real story of what happened at McLaren. Things like that. And you think, well, what is the real story? What happened at McLaren? What could it be other than Lewis did a very good job that in 2007? But no, we'll see. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of both in that one. Good question. Right. So this is a question. Let's have a look at this one. It's about Nigel. And it's from Jesus is the Truth. Well, no doubt about that. I'd like to hear more about your time with Nigel Mansell. Think he was so special. 92 F1 World Champion, 93 Indy Champion. Yeah, to win 2 championships like that, back to back. To jump straight into an Indy car and be as quick as he was at a time when they were unbelievably quick and dangerous. Don't forget that. They were very different animals to the ones we see today. And had that big shunt at Phoenix testing and recovered from that nonetheless. Hurt his back in that one. Massive shunt backwards into the wall. And by the time Indy came round, he was right on it. Quite capable of winning the race and getting the pole. Didn't, but very near. And in 92, he was breathlessly good in Formula One. Yeah, what can I say? I always rated Nigel, always did, from 78 when I first met him. And I had no doubt at all that in the right car, he was always going to be as good as he was and turned out to be. So that was very... it was a relief when he did get into a decent car and he could show his talent, because there were so many observers, I think outside is the right word, who didn't rate him or didn't like him anyway, and because they didn't like him, they didn't rate him, and a lot of that was the British press, oddly. And then of course when he was really successful, they kind of all jumped on the bandwagon and took advantage of the success that he generated, the amount of interest he generated and the business he generated for everybody, I guess. I had my head down a lot in 92 when he won that championship in 92. I was a team manager at Williams. So for me, that year was a bit like being in the army, as I think I've said before. One day just bled into another. No time to stop and think, really. Even in those days, we had fewer races, but we did a massive amount of testing. And from my point of view and that of the engineers, David Brown, John Russell, we were going from races to tests incessantly. And breathless time, but very, very enjoyable as well, looking back now, to have such a great driver in such a great car. Adrian Newey, Patrick Head, Paddy Lowe combination, difficult to beat that. And Renault as well, great engine. So he was good. He was good in every respect, very good at all sports, whether it be golf, karate, or judo, I think it was. No, karate, I think it was. Snooker, going solo in 15 hours flying. He was just an action man, and he was just ahead of the game all the time, and was not afraid to say exactly what he thought at any given moment. And it's a cliche, didn't suffer fools gladly. I mean, that's absolutely the case. And Nigel, like a lot of these great megastars, had this ego of, I'm the captain of the ship called Nigel Mansell, SS Nigel Mansell, and if you want to be on the ship, I'll give you a great ride, but if you don't, you can jump off. And that's kind of how he ran his life, and still does, I think, to some extent. He's still totally into what he's doing at any given moment, whether it be golf, whether it be some other project, selling some stuff. I think he's got he's got some more memorabilia coming up for sale, or new businesses that he's starting, whatever. He's just into everything at 100%. And I always enjoyed going to races, particularly when Nigel wasn't in a super quick car or a competitive car, put it that way, because I always knew at some point of the weekend he would do something completely remarkable, whether it be qualifying, whether it be some 360-degree spin, whether it be in the race. He would do something larger than life. And I think we've probably all come across athletes, sportsmen in other sports who we could think of who are like that. I can think of a few in cricket, Ian Botham being a very good example, Steve Waugh being another. But Nigel was the racing driver personification of that. There was always a moment when you knew he was going to do something. And for me, one of the great moments of my Formula One life was the 80 Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, when Nigel had his first race in Austria in the Lotus 81C, which had this sort of long wheelbase and the gearbox in front of the final drive. Terrible car, horrendous understeer everywhere, and then he had the fuel leak in the race. But he kept going as long as he could with the fuel burns on his back. And then the next race he did was the Dutch Grand Prix, again with that car, and it was hopeless around Zandvoort. And by the end of sort of half an hour to go, he hadn't qualified. And in those days, everybody was limited to 2 sets of qualifying tyres. And Nigel had used his first set and wasn't in the race. And Elio De Angelis and Mario Andretti had both qualified. And literally with 20 minutes to go, Colin Chapman said, put Nigel in Elio's car, because Elio had done his 2 runs. So they took the tyres off took his second set of tyres, put them on Elio's car, into Elio's seat, Elio's seatbelt, Elio's footwell area, everything, just straight in the car. And he went out 1 lap. And it's a big ask, completely different car. Okay, he'd tested it at Silverstone, but that was all. And I was at the beginning of the pit lane with my stopwatch. And I don't know if you can do that today, but I'm at the beginning of the pit lane where you see them going past the start-finish line, and then you just literally turn your back, walk 10 steps, and you're on the outside of the left-hander leading up to the Hanserug exit. And so I could time him at the start-finish line and then immediately go around and watch him go through Hanserug. And I knew, because I've been timing Carlos Reutemann and others, I knew what a quick time would be approximately if I started at the start-finish line by the time they got to that left-hand bank left-hander. And so Nigel goes past first lap, I went like that. Only just 1 lap, so all he's going to get out of the tyres. And so I rushed over to the Hanserug, and he came out through the right-hand kink, and the car was just absolutely beautifully poised, slight oversteer, just neutral, perfect. Came out of the right kink, the quick kink. And then I just saw him braking down towards me into Hanserug and went in. It was classic Nigel, very early turn in, patient, nothing happening for what seemed like an age, and then just perfect, what I now know to be short corner driving. And I looked at the stopwatch because I had a splitter, and he was right on it. I remember at that moment, my pulse rate must have gone up to, 160 or something like that. And I remember thinking, he's going to do it. And he came down the start-finish line, click. And I wish I could remember the times, but he was, 12.8, would it have been something like that? Maybe not. Anyway, he was 2/10 slower than Elio, easily in the race. And I remember running down to the Lotus garage and Colin saying, I got it. And Colin was looking at me and I was looking at him, and it was just the most amazing moment. And one of the most amazing things I've seen a racing driver do. And that's what I mean about Nigel being able to just seize a moment and play these big points incredibly well. Because, it would have been so easy for him to have gone off, to brake too late somewhere. And the good news is, of course, they didn't know what sector times were back then. We didn't have the sector. He didn't have a display, obviously. So he didn't know how quick he was. He was just driving. He was just feeling the car. He had no idea how quick he was. All he knew was that this was a much better car than the one he'd been driving. That was it. And that's, today, if Nigel had known that sector 1, he was right up there, potentially going to be quicker than Elio, maybe he might have made a mistake. I don't know. But he didn't. And it was just a moment of magic. It really was. And that was one of the best Nigel Mansell moments that I ever had. And I remember being so happy that moment when he came back into the garage. And he'd seen the time, because the boys showed it as he came down into the pit lane. And he used to get out of the car and he took the helmet off and the neck collar. He said, was that all right then? Yes, Nigel. I was bouncing off the walls. Thanks for asking the question, Memories. Peter has AOL, online dial-up. Well, if only. Lots of smiley faces here coming up. Morning from Western US. Hi there. Yes, we can, Peter. Hello. Yes, I think that was, can anybody see me, hear me? I think I could. Okay, they've done that one. Here we go, John Doe. wonder if that's your real name. I hope not. What am I doing here? Here we go. I always say that because there's so many things that I have to click and touch that I sometimes get a bit confused with my little brain. Did Checo really think he could win? If Max was all weekend about a second faster each round lap, he caught him by 4 seconds in one lap. Well, I think Checo, when he said something, I think he said, how did he get in front? Was that the undercut? And they said, yeah. And I think he thought then, you know, I'm glad it was, because at least it didn't pass me on the road. He probably thought, you know, that was a good thing. I don't know. I mean, all I've said is, I've said a million times that Checo he's got very good qualities in a lot of areas, but he's no match for Max when it comes to the complete lap or even the complete corner for that matter. Not all corners, but most corners. And but let's have a look. You know, again, it's going to take a while because I'm not very organised. Let's have a look at what they did in those early, what sort of advantage Checo had. There's Max anyway. Let's see if we can find Sergio Perez. By coming in on that opening lap. I mean, that should be enough to have won in that race, really, in theory, shouldn't it? Because that's a huge thing to have been given. For some reason I can't find Perez now on here. Very annoying. Hamilton, Sainz, Russell, fastest laps. Anyway, let's just... Oh, here we go. Got it. Well done, Windsor. Right. So on lap 3, Sergio Perez is doing a 27.5 and Max Verstappen is doing a 48.6. Right, that's his first lap out of the pits in Max's case. On lap 4, Max is doing 25.2 and Perez is doing 24.3 because his tyres are hot. Then at lap 5, Max is doing 23.4 and Perez is doing 24.1. Okay, he's had a bit of a scare there or something. 6, Max is doing 22.5, Perez 24.3. So Perez... At that point, he's doing 26s, 24s, 24s, and Max is doing 22s, 22s, 23s. So the track is wet, it's damp offline, it's spooky, I guess, if you're Checo and you had the odd lock-up, and you're leaving a bit of margin, and Max is all over you. But, you know, as I say, that was a big advantage he had in those 2 laps, in coming in early, getting the tyres hot. And in normal circumstances, if that was, you know, if that was, say, Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz were still together in the same team, if you gave Carlos Sainz that sort of advantage, i.e. you're coming in lap 1 and the other guy's coming in lap 2, Carlos would have parlayed that into and let's say it was a winning car, he would have parlayed that into a win. And Perez didn't. And then he got beaten ultimately by, certainly on the road, by Fernando because of all the mess he made of the last part of the race. So it wasn't very good, was it? You know, given that advantage, it was a big advantage to be handed. 27.5 on lap 3 to Max's 48.6. You know, that should be enough to win you a Grand Prix in the same car, and it's a Grand Prix winning car. You would have thought. And lesser drivers than Perez have actually parlayed that sort of advantage into a race win in the history of the sport. Not very good. Here we go. This is a question about Max's pass on Gasly when Gasly chopped him quite well, didn't he? Not chopped him, but defended quite well going into Tarzan, turn 1. Called Tarzan, why? I wonder if anybody knows. I was reading about it the other day. It's called Tarzan because when the circuit was first designed, completed in the 1950s, early 1950s, there was a potato field on the outside of that corner and a farmer who looked who was a big beefy guy, looked like Tarzan. So they call it the Tarzan corner. Potato farmer. Darom. What do you think of the overtake of Max on Gasly? Genius or over the edge? And do you think Gasly did the right thing moving out of the way without hindsight of his podium? Huge Max fan here, by the way. Did he move out of the way? I think he just ran wide, didn't he? Speaking of which, just before I get on to that, wasn't it funny that Max had that moment at the beginning of FP3? He was going through that left-hander, and in the middle it was unbelievably slippery, and he had this massive moment and then just put it nicely on the grass and just kept going. And then presumably an engineer not saying to Kevin Magnussen, and this probably applies up and down the pit lane, Max Verstappen's just had a serious moment in the middle of that left-hander. There's obviously something weird at the track there. Be very, very careful in the first couple of laps when the tyres are not up to temperature. I'm assuming they didn't say that. Question why, but anyway, they didn't, because when Kevin went in exactly the same place, he lost it exactly the same way as Max, but in his case he overcorrected a little bit too suddenly and the car just went straight into the wall. Difference between Kevin and Max, as I think I've said in a video. But anyway, getting back to that corner and what happened there, my take on what happened there, maybe you guys know more than I do, but as I understand it, Gasly did a pretty good job of defending through Tarzan, and as they came back over the hill, Max thought, right, I'll have him here, and just went down the inside. And I think Gasly, I don't think Gasly thought, oh yeah, okay, I've had a good go at defending him, now I'll let him pass. I think Gasly had already eyed up, I think Max had already seen that Gasly was going to go around the outside, and that's why he went down the inside. And I think when Gasly saw that, I think he was just going a bit too quick and a bit too quickly, and he was a bit sort of shocked that Max had done that, and then he ran wide as a result. So in that sense, it was a great pass by Max, because he took what Gasly was going to give him at turn one and didn't allow his car to be hit in any way and stayed out of trouble, but took it. But then next corner he was just there hammering him straight down the inside, and that was my perception of it. And that's really good driving, I think, because it's quite easy to get into a wheel bashing situation when you're Max Verstappen and you're having to pass 4 or 5 cars as a result of making a late pit stop, 1 lap too late. You know, there's always the risk that people are going to be forcing the issue, and it's very difficult to be aggressive, overtake, not let Perez get away from you without anybody hitting you. That bit in italics, that's the difficult thing. And Gasly's pretty tough. He's a pretty tough guy. You know, I wouldn't put him up there with Magnussen, but he's somewhere near that. He's a very tough racer, and I think, you know, Max did exactly the right. He positioned the car perfectly at Tarzan, just to force the issue with Gasly, to the point where Gasly's adrenaline was up, and I think he just went in a little bit too quickly and ran wide, and that was it. He was always going to go around the top anyway, I think, which is why Max, as soon as he saw that, he just went like that down the inside. Really good to watch. As I say, very good bit of driving. So, Andrew de Villiers. Another good cricketer, actually, de Villiers. South African. Not playing anymore, I don't think. Keep going on about cricket, don't I? It must annoy everybody. I'm the only person in the Formula 1 world that... Well, no, I know Oscar Piastri is quite good at cricket. Being an Aussie, yeah, mate, yeah. Managed by Mark Webber. He's a cricketer. Right. It's nearly the witching hour as well. I'm going to have to bow out soon. Andrew de Villiers. Good day, Sir Windsor. Speaking of which, we don't talk about Sir Lewis very much. Maybe I should be a bit more deferential in Sir Lewis. Or Sir Patrick Head. I never call him Sir Patrick. I always say, hey, Patrick, what's going on, man? Good day, Sir Windsor. Trust that you're well. I am, thank you very much. Perez should be much closer to Max at present. Max is on his own, and Max doesn't appreciate that. Max doesn't appreciate that? Why do you say that? You mean he should be more appreciative of Perez being slow and say that, or what? I mean, what can Max do other than his own job and look after his own car and do his own job with his own people? He can't be concerned with what's going on with the other car and what Perez's problems are. But if the team finishes 1-2 and he's in front, obviously he's going to be delighted, I think. But apart from that, why would he worry about what Perez is doing? I'm sure you probably don't mean that seriously though, do you? What you're basically saying is that it's a massive gulf now. And, you know, and it's interesting, isn't it? It's basically ever since Perez said, I got a chance to win this championship, I can beat Max. Ever since he said that, it's gone downhill for him. You know, say nothing, do nothing. It's always Frank Williams' philosophy of life. So Frank, what do you think we should do at the next race? Because Honda are expecting the drivers to wear the Honda cap on the podium, and Goodyear have said that if we don't wear the Goodyear cap, there'll be no bonuses from Goodyear. What do you think we should do? Let me think about it. And that was all that ever happened. I miss Frank so much. Okay, this one's it's a bit difficult to read, so I'm not going to put it up, but it's because the thing's gone a bit glitchy. But hi Peter, all the Checo fans are saying that the Red Bull cars are different. What is your point of view on this? Greeting from Holland. Well, I don't think they are different. I've said this in a couple of videos now, and you can see them on the channel, and I've hopefully backed up my statements with some illustrations to show how differently Max does drive from Perez at important places, entries to corners, turn-in points to corners, etc. And that just gives it, that's just the tip of the iceberg, really, of the differences between the two, because what I could never, and what nobody can really tell, is what Max is doing with his hands and his arms and his feet in the cockpit. And that's the real difference. It's that softness of touch, and that's something that shows up in the wet, as I've said earlier, not necessarily in terms of line in the wet, but that lovely rate of input that he has, that perfect rate of input, is something that Perez doesn't have, and that's what it's all about. And beyond that, on the other side of the coin, in my experience in Formula One, there is no way a team would ever deliberately run a slower second car. They would always try to run the best two cars they possibly could, because of the Constructors' Championship, and because it's so difficult in racing to master all the variables and to win a race. The last thing you want to do is compromise that with anything that is in your control, like the preparation of a car or the parts that go into a car. And every race, Red Bull, for sure, Christian Horner would be thinking, if Max has a problem here, we got to make sure Perez wins this race. And he's not going to do that if he's giving Perez inferior equipment. So, and we've seen that that does work well, and we've seen that Perez occasionally, when Max does have a problem, can win a race. And sometimes he can beat Max on a good day. Baku, a good example. So, you know, I don't know why anyone would think, anyone who thinks that Perez is being given deliberately inferior equipment, in my opinion, doesn't know anything at all about Formula One. Hamza Chowdhury. Is this going to be the last one? I don't know. I think I've got a few things going on and we need to get to. So, this is all about Aston versus Mercedes and McLaren, I think, isn't it? Good question. Hamza Chowdhury. Do you think Aston are still slower than McLaren and Mercedes? I think they are if you consider qualifying, but Alonso got past Norris and Russell at the start and mastered the mixed conditions. I think McLaren, well, I did make the point in the first video, and if I'd been a live stream before Zandvoort, I would have made the point then, that when they announced that the hardest of the three compounds would be used at Zandvoort, as they were used at Silverstone and Barcelona, you had to bet that the McLaren would be very, very quick, because on that compound, it's been super quick. So that's been one of the things that's inherent to the McLaren's pace at the moment, that compound. And don't ask me what they've got for Monza, because I haven't actually checked yet, but no doubt we'll find out soon. Well, it's already there, I just haven't checked. I doubt it's that compound though. I'm sure it'll be a softer compound at Monza. So that's the first thing. McLaren on that hard compound is really good. It's just in sync with the tyres. And in that stage, I think they're definitely quicker than Aston Martin and Mercedes. And we saw that at Zandvoort. Interesting between Aston Martin and Mercedes, the battle between the two at Zandvoort, because you could argue that the all-round better car was maybe the Mercedes, and there was not much in it in top speed, 1 or 2 kilometers an hour through the speed trap in the race between the two. But then again, you know, some people will shoot me down in flames for saying this, but I don't think Fernando Alonso is the greatest qualifier in the world, and I think George and Lewis are pretty good. So that has to be taken into account as well when you're trying to judge the effectiveness of the cars. In my opinion, and it's easy, and it's an easy cop-out answer, I think the Aston Martin right now probably doesn't have as much efficient downforce as the Mercedes when the Mercedes is right, but it has a much bigger sweet spot around which the drivers and the engineers can work. And that's what we saw yesterday at Zandvoort. We saw Fernando in a big sweet spot of balance and predictability of what the car was going to do, giving him lots of confidence when the track was greasy and difficult. And as a result, the track position he had, he was then totally on top of the car when the track dried out and he was on soft tyres. Nice compound to be on, of course, because the ambience are quite slow, quite cold. And that was the hardest of the compounds anyway. So all that worked really well. And Fernando in those conditions is always great anyway. And not those conditions, but when all the variables are mixed up. That's when Fernando's really good. He can keep a very clear head and he just allows his racing nous just takes over. And the Mercedes, by contrast, even when it's right, I think it probably has more efficient downforce. And we probably saw that in qualifying and the way George was able to get a lot out of that car. Lewis, not so much so. He didn't get the car right, did he? But then again, he got it pretty much right in the back end of the race. And George on the hard tyre probably was never going to be that good. And they got this smaller sweet spot. That's all it is. You know, they've got a much smaller sweet spot in which they can operate. So when the variables come into play, it's much more difficult for Mercedes to get the car right than it is Aston Martin. So of the two, you'd want to have the Aston Martin set up for sure. We'll see at Monza. It'll be interesting to see who's quicker over the lap at Monza, Aston Martin or Mercedes, because it'll be about obviously speed through the air, and that will reflect how much efficient downforce the teams can generate with small rear wings, for example. And McLaren may not be as super competitive as they have been with the compound choice changing for Monza. I think it is changing. It's going to take me a while to look it up. I wish I knew. It's not doing my homework. I should have known what compound they're on for Monza, but I think it is a softer compound. If that's the case, McLaren won't be slow, that is for sure, but they may not have the mega advantage they have. To me, one of the mysteries of the race really was Lando Norris's performance in the back end of the race, because you can understand that he was on the back foot after being kept out for too long and then coming in, unlike Oscar, who didn't come in at all. And as we now know, as Peter Windsor now knows, but he never looked a lot better than Lewis, and then Lewis got him anyway on intermediates. So it was all a bit odd that Fernando's momentum died away the way it did, and he wasn't quicker. It's a little bit like Piastri in the qualifying in Q3. It just sort of faded away, because you would have imagined the way Lando looked in qualifying, and he looked throughout the weekend until that point, that he would have, got past Sainz, wouldn't he, really? That's what you would have thought. But he didn't. And there's no explanation for that other than that they just had a weekend where they got some points, but we'll look forward to the next one, sort of cliches and stuff like that. So a mystery. I wouldn't say disappointing, just a complete mystery, really, why they weren't quicker. Maybe on the intermediates, as it just bears out what I was saying, their sweet spot is when they're on that soft tyre with that in the hard compound range, and that's when McLaren just comes into its own. And when they're on intermediates, they're just any other race car, give or take the midfield. I mean, they're obviously high midfield, more than high midfield, but not that much better than a Mercedes on intermediates, or an Alpine for that matter. So there we are. Okay, everyone. Sorry I was a bit late starting, and I think I've made up for it now. It's a good 2 hours, and I need to get on. And equally, 2 hours is quite a long time, really. And I'm quite lucky that the internet has lasted this long, so I don't want to tempt fate for too long on that one. So big thanks to Pitbox and to Jetcraft for their support of this channel, this live stream, and most of all, thanks to you, everybody, for all your questions. Sorry that I haven't got through them all. But there will be another day. It'll be after Monza, sometime between Monza and Singapore. As I say, I'm going to be in Singapore as well, which will be quite fun. So looking forward to that very much. And take care. Have a good time. And I'll see you on, Friday of Monza.